Hello and good evening, everybody. And I would like to read the words from the expatsportugal.com website about this webinar because they sum it up so well. With so many banking apps and platforms available, transferring your money can be done at the click of a button, as we know these days. Even for those most prepared, it's often one of the last things on the list because it's instant, right? Good question. I'm sure we'll address that tonight. Well, getting the best rate and ensuring the money will arrive at its destination on time isn't always as easy as you may think. And missing out on securing a property or repercussions for late payment can be heavier than any financial loss. So we'll address that and many other things tonight with our special guest, Sarah Davey from Spartan FX. Good to see you again, Sarah. How are you?
Hello, happy Thanksgiving for anyone that's obviously in America. It's great to be here.
And how is it in the UK? Is there much of a celebration that you're aware of over there? I'm assuming you're in the UK this evening.
I am not really, to be honest. Having said that, any excuse to celebrate. We celebrate St. Patrick's Day, even though a lot of us are not Irish.
Yeah.
Any excuse, to be honest.
All right. So if you give us instructions on how to do that in the chat, we'll go and do that after the webinar. Well, after the Dream Team session, of course, at 10 o'clock this evening. It's not too late for us to get a bit of Thanksgiving fun as well. And pretty autumnal or wintry over in the UK at the moment. Do you wish you were back in Portugal?
I do actually, to be honest. Obviously, I do, as everybody wishes they were in Portugal if they're not already there.
Yeah.
But actually, it's been quite nice. It's not been too cold. The sun's been out, so can't ask for better than that.
All right, brilliant. Devon's here. Hi, Sarah from Devon and Yoshiko. Good to put a face to a name. That's a really important part of these webinars, is to meet the professionals who help you out on your journey to Portugal. Do let us know how your Thanksgiving Day has been and how you celebrate. We'd like to know that, and where you are in the world and any milestones you've got to celebrate on your journey here to Portugal. And of course, any questions specifically you've got about moving currency around the world, especially to Portugal, of course, pop that in the chat too. So, Sarah, it's probably quite a good idea to have a look at currency itself, the rates, the markets. What's going on there?
Absolutely. I was going to just touch on it briefly because obviously, you know, there's a lot of people that might watch this back. Some people are not on tonight, but might watch it at a later date. That's the thing to bear in mind with exchange rates. They are moving all the time. So if you are getting any quotes, bear in mind that as soon as you get that quote, it then becomes out of date. So always do a like-for-like comparison. You know, when clients have said, oh, the rate was not what I got quoted from my bank. When did you get that price? Or I got it yesterday, or I got it last week. The rates do change that dramatically even throughout the day. So as I said, as soon as we start talking about what's happening right now, if you watch this in a week or a month's time, or even in 6 months' time, depending on how far in advance that you're planning your move and looking and doing your research, this obviously will be out of date. So what I really wanted to touch on is really what moves the market, because there's lots of different factors. Some things seem very obvious. You know, the things that unfortunately we've seen in probably the last 3 to 4 years. You've got the pandemic, you've got wars, natural disasters. You know, they're kind of the main things that take us by surprise and no one can obviously forecast. Then there's obviously a lot of political things like elections. And then we've got things like any data releases, whether there be, for example, inflation data. That's what's been really looked at in the last sort of really 12 months, if not maybe 2 years. And that's really been the key driver of why many central banks have been raising interest rates to try and tackle inflation, which we've seen the US started that very aggressively, which is why a lot of people have benefited from nearly parity with the euro US dollar rate, because they've been raising interest rates to tackle inflation, and then the UK and obviously the Eurozone have followed suit with that as well. So they're actively looking at that. Now it seems that we've had a little bit of a respite with the inflation and it's looking more promising. So it may be that they're going to really pause raising interest rates. Now we're looking at how economies are performing, whether they're doing well, whether there may be recessions. That's the next sort of key thing that the markets really are looking at. The other things as well is sometimes we find that data is actually priced in. So if it goes as we expect, you see very little change in the exchange rates. If it goes against expectations, so if we think, for example, the Fed are going to raise interest rates and they don't, then that can cause market movements as well. A lot of what we do is watch what the sentiment is, which is basically when any interest rate announcements, anything comes out, what are they talking about after that? That gives a precursor onto what they might do next, and what their thought process is. And we look at a lot of that, and sometimes just by saying something that can move the market. It isn't always just based on physical data. And then the other things that we might look at is with the US dollar specifically, so it's quite important obviously for Americans, is that you might see it in newspaper articles, and we do mention it, but there are certain currencies that they call safe haven currencies, so that when there's any maybe problems in the world, or there's people are a bit nervous, then they invest in what they call safe haven currencies like the US dollar, which will help strengthen it. So when the market feels more reassured and they're now looking at doing things a little bit riskier, they'll pull out of the US dollar, which is what we're seeing at the moment as well. So that's why we've seen a little bit of weakness in the US dollar, is because while it's great for you that the Fed were increasing interest rates, it's not actually that great for the economy. So they really try not to do that. But obviously that weakens the US dollar. And also when things start to become a little bit better, again, people pull out of the US dollar. So, while a lot of countries are looking at some of these positive things, obviously that's not maybe so great for you if you're selling your US dollar and buying your euros. But the key thing is, out of all of that, there's lots of things that impact the exchange rates. And ultimately, that's one of the reasons why we exist, and we're looking at this every day, all the time, because there's so much going on, and we just try and help really manage that, to be honest.
Yeah, and perhaps the best way to stay on top of it is to keep your eye on it with the help of somebody at Spartan FX. Open an account and and be in regular contact. And you don't mind that. The team doesn't mind that. I understand from the testimonial, some of which I'll share tonight. People create great relationships with their currency counselor over. That's my term. It's not an official term, but people strike up friendships, don't they, with the team at Spartan FX, and you can keep in touch, and you get a sense of good times to buy and sell.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that's sometimes also bearing in mind that sometimes obviously you're all waiting for the rates to improve, but bear in mind that might not necessarily be possible within your time frame. If you've got a longer time frame, then you might have more luxury of doing that. But again, it just really depends on obviously what's going on and what the sentiment is at the time. And it may be a case of, which we'll show some graphs in a minute, that we're just kind of really keeping on top of the rates constantly throughout your journey, and that you'll see a lot of sort of peaks and troughs. And it's really a case of trying to buy your euros when it's at a perhaps a better rate than it has been.
Yes. Okay. To keep an eye on things then, and to realize that there are many variables in the mix, and we do seem to be in quite volatile times in human history. So even more reason to keep an eye on what's going on. Talking about volatility and things happening, there are rumblings about Wise. I don't know if you want to comment on this, but yeah, I know I'm beginning my comments by saying on social media, people are talking about some challenges with Wise. I'm seeing this from a few different sources, and people obviously asking the question, what's going on there? What's your view on that, and what do you think is happening at Wise at the moment?
The only thing that I have seen in the press is about them sort of pausing some onboarding of some corporate clients in Europe. Again, I don't know the ins and outs of what's brought that about. But obviously that we have customers that have come to us that have used Wise previously, and usually it's because they've encountered some sort of problems along the line, which I think we're going to kind of touch on some of the issues around sort of compliance. And this is obviously another thing that's maybe cropped up of transferring the money to them. But I think in all of those scenarios, the key thing is that either they struggling to transfer money, they've not provided the right documents. We've had clients that have had money stuck with Wise, but the key is they haven't been able to speak to somebody, which has made the whole situation perhaps a little bit more stressful for people.
Sure, yeah, and compare and contrast that to having a named person who you can speak to at Spartan FX, and you can see a clear distinction there. That's great. You mentioned compliance. And this might be maybe one of the things we talk about, unless you want to do the graphs now, because there was a question I want to ask you. You know, small sums that people get used to using Wise or similar online banking systems, and then they imagine that it will be the same when they transfer a big amount, and then that can spark different compliance issues, can't it? Moving bigger amounts. Do you want to talk
I think there's
that now?
a couple of things within that. I mean, the compliance side of things, I think one of the reasons it's good to be able to do these webinars is that, yes, what's the exchange rate on the day against your bank, against an online provider like Wise, against that, obviously that is very important, and that will dictate how much it initially costs. But there is so much more to moving your money that you might not have realized. Have you not done it before? Or maybe you've done it and it seems to have gone fine. The key thing is with banks, with money, especially now, there's more and more regulations around transferring money, and especially around money laundering and the anti-money laundering regulations that we will have to adhere by. We have to provide certain documents on certain amounts of money.
Yeah.
So it may be when you're thinking about, oh, I'm only doing small amounts, you've probably not needed any compliance. But what normally happens and what should happen within a company is that when you reach a certain threshold, so I might only be doing, I don't know, you might send €1,000 to a lawyer, you might pay for your NIF, you might be buying a car. It's all under maybe a €10,000 threshold. But when you add all of those small payments up over a period of time, say 6 months, maybe they do reach over 10,000. And at that point, you'll need to provide some sort of compliance documentation because you've reached certain compliance thresholds. Or in some companies, again, the spot checks. You know, if you do a certain amount, even if it's not over 10,000, say you've done, I don't know, 20, 10 or 15 small transactions within a period of time, again, they'll double check what it is that you're doing. Or it's just a spot check. You know, they have X amount of clients, and then, you know, every day or every month they'll spot check the odd client. And again, really the purpose of it is to protect customers, your whole customer base, because as I said, if someone is doing something fraudulently, you don't want to affect the business. And secondly, obviously, you know, these sort of things unfortunately are targeted by money laundering people that want to launder money. It's a way of doing it. So the way that money launderers do it is by doing small amounts and trying to keep under the threshold. Mm-hmm. So
that might, and those patterns are observed, and then you might get the spot check, even though that's not your
yes, of course.
intention.
Yeah,
you might fall foul of that.
Yeah, right. It's not necessarily sometimes you're specifically targeted. It's just part of the internal processes that
and I'm sure AI is assisting in the process of monitoring what's going on and then triggering that sort of checking from time to time. So be aware of that as well. It may be different when the amounts change. Did you say you wanted to show some graphs? I always like to see the graphs.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the other thing on the small amounts that we've talked about before, I know that even some of the reviews, and we talk about larger sums, because when you transfer a larger sum, our exchange rate movement will make more of a difference, obviously. And it is probably slightly more daunting doing those transactions of clicking the button, sending your money, where's it gone, waiting for it to turn up at the other end. Yeah. It will be more stressful. So, you know, I do understand that's why sometimes we do talk about the larger sums, but equally, you still need to move money for various different reasons. Yeah. And again, like what we just touched on before, it does all add up. So where you think, right, I'm just doing a smaller, I'll just do that now like that. Actually, what does that maybe equate to over a period of time? Is that €5,000? Well, actually, if we look at I don't know can I share my screen?
I'll make sure you're co-host so you can do that, and I'll say a few hellos while you're getting ready with that. Yeah, you should be able to now. So saying hello to Paula, zooming in from Seattle, and Gail in Calgary. Of course, you can deal with the Canadian loonie as well, can't you? I'm not being rude there. I think that is what they call it. And hello from Santa Maria, California, from Frank. So good evening to you all. And I've heard this week, I was reminded that Turkey, which is traditional at this time of year on this day, has tryptophan in it, which is a relaxant. So maybe that accounts for why there aren't many questions. Everyone's really relaxed after their Thanksgiving dinner. But don't forget, we've got Sarah here tonight, and you can ask questions in the chat, and I'll make sure all those questions get to Sarah. What have we got on the screen now, Sarah?
This is actually selling US dollars and buying euros graph. So it's a euro US dollar graph. So as I was saying, with the sort of smaller amounts, actually maybe buying a larger lump sum, and when I say that, it could be 5,000 euros at a certain time, might make those small amounts cheaper rather than you just doing it on a sort of ad hoc kind of basis. I mean, it's different. I went on holiday recently and I was using euros. You know, I buy, you know, a meal in a restaurant. I go into a supermarket and buy something. It's not quite the same, but I would say even though the small amounts, you know, you're still making certain payments, as I said, you know, paying lawyers' fees, paying for your NIF, maybe you're renting property. Now you know, for many in Portugal, you have to put up so many months up front. So, you know, we're still talking about a few thousand. And by maybe thinking about buying a sort of lump sum of some description, that might make those smaller amounts cheaper, or certainly help you budget. Because that's the biggest thing that I see and hear on some of these webinars or socials, is it must be very difficult to budget, because usually they say you end up spending more than you would anticipate anyway, which I think everybody does in any scenario. But also then you've got to obviously then factor in the exchange rate. So it's a sort of another element there. And you know, those savings, even sort of small amounts, might make that difference to help make that budget a bit more affordable, or help you understand the budget, what money you've actually got to work with. So this is year to date, so that sort of last sort of this year, we can see sort of it's very fluctuating, lots of, as we said, peaks and troughs. But just to give you an idea, in the last month, so if you bought your euros today compared to a month ago, and you're buying about 250,000 euros, that's nearly 9,000 dollars difference.
That is a big difference, isn't it?
Which is a big difference, and that is on the exchange rate movement. Now, yes, we're talking about a larger sum if you're maybe buying a property, but you're still talking maybe a few hundred or a few thousand on sort of the lower sums. What could you do with that money?
Yep.
Essentially,
a lot of pastel donatas.
Exactly.
So yes, definitely. Okay, thank you very much. That's the US dollar then. We've got a question from Gail. What is the outlook for the Canadian dollar exchange rate for euros? Does it typically follow the Canadian exchange rate for the US as well? Do they tend to mirror each other?
There's a little bit of similarities. Obviously, there's certain things around sort of oil that's linked to. Again, that's the thing, sorry, I didn't mention that some countries, there's certain maybe commodities within them, like for example Australia, the mining, and you've got I think wool, and they're close links with China, and then you've got in Canada it's oil. So again, there's other factors that we're looking at there that's slightly different, but again probably a little bit similar in some ways to the US with the strength of their economy.
You mentioned elections earlier on, interestingly, and we've definitely got one in Portugal on the 10th of March of next year. And we found out recently. I think there are many calls for an election in the UK at the moment. It seems, well, hourly, with one thing after another. I'm not sure what the timescale is. What do the US folks and Canadians think of? Justin Trudeau seems to have been in the post for quite a long time. What are your timescales over there? What do you think in the US and Canada for elections next year? But it could be a busy election time in the next year or so, couldn't it? Certainly here in Portugal, probably in the UK. I wonder what people think in US and Canada.
The other thing around elections is rates can move very quickly, because ultimately it has in the past gone massively against expectations, like Trump, for example. So it can move very quickly. And what we found with some clients in the past is that they've not done anything about it. And then all of a sudden the rates have started moving dramatically, and they've either thought, oh my God, you know, it's moving against me, I need to be doing something about this, or it's in a really good, it's moved in my favor, I would like to take advantage of it. Because sometimes it can be short-lived, because what happens is the market reacts in a panic or in shock, and then once they've had time to digest the information on the news, then it can bounce back a little bit. So you might not, you know, if it's moved in your favor, it might not stay there for as long as you would like. And with us, it is free to open an account, and it's still an obligation to use us, and we open it very quickly. But equally, I've seen clients trying to ring at that specific time and they haven't got an account open. and then they've got to open an account, and then it takes, they've
Yes,
missed that
make a note,
opportunity.
folks. Yes, definitely. Sooner rather than later. We'll come back to that, I'm sure, about the ease and convenience of opening up an account, and better to do it sooner rather than later. It was one of the early points made, but I'm sure you'll have that as a final thought to leave with people this evening when we finish talking. Canada elections won't come soon enough. Veranda, not likely though over there. Devon also happy and locked and loaded, ready with Spartan FX. And we've got some use cases that we can talk through a bit later on. But I think you want to cover a few more general points, right, Sarah? That things that can come up, bureaucratic obstacles and difficulties.
Yeah, the other thing, which I think you mentioned at the beginning in the intro about payments being held up, or you're not meeting your deadlines, that's another thing that we see a lot of, because people, it's slow on the list, I know, compared to everything else that you're doing with your move. So often it's the last thing you think about it, and usually it's around someone said I need to make a payment, I need to make it by a deadline, I've got to do it now, and they're trying to do it instantly. And then what happens is, for example, we've seen people try to use their bank and the money's taken a week for it to arrive in the beneficiary. We've seen it where they've tried to use an online platform and they were paying a deposit for a property, and the money got stuck for nearly 2 weeks. Fortunately, they had more money and were able to use us, for example, and then transfer the money across.
Yes.
Again, you don't want to find that you missed that deadline, because you might incur maybe charges. You may find that you might lose that property potentially if you don't meet the deadline. So we've seen it around that. Or what can happen is, again, it's all around sort of the money laundering sort of regulations. The beneficiary banks sometimes flag the payment. And basically all they want to know is a little bit more information around how did the person acquire the money, or what's the reason for the transfer. And what normally happens, for example, if you were using your bank to make the transfer, is they would then, say the Portuguese bank account would then send a message back to your bank for more information, and then it would have to be sent across. Now, I'm sure you've had experience dealing with your Portuguese bank and your US bank, and that communication is very slow. And often when you ring, people don't quite know what's going on, or maybe can't give you an update. So again, when you think, say, for example, you come to us on Wednesday and say, right, I need to make a payment, I need there on Friday, and you use your bank, or the money's stuck, what do you do then? So it's trying to avoid these stressful situations where maybe that we can avoid that. And even if you don't use this, all I would say is try and think about it beforehand. Even try and do it maybe even the week before, just in case there is any problems or holdups, and you want to make sure that you make those deadlines. Yeah,
apart from hitting some bureaucratic hoops and blockages, that appears to be the other biggie, doesn't it? Is like not leaving it too late and making the assumption that just because you think it should go through smoothly, that it will.
Exactly, and that's the other thing with sort of maybe smaller amounts, or doing it while you're still in your home country. So if you say, for example, you're in Canada or in America and you've been making some small transfers, they've gone through fine, not a problem. You leave and you're suddenly in Portugal and you're putting down a deposit for a property, or maybe for a rental, and your bank then won't make that international payment because you're not there, maybe because it's over a certain amount. They need some more authorization from you. We've had clients where they've requested some documentation to be signed, or they need an international card reader. Your online banking, sometimes they have a limit on how much you can do each day. I know in the UK it's about £10,000. We've had one client whose bank had a limit on, they could only move, it was $70,000 every 30 days. So these things start to then creep in, perhaps, maybe on the larger sums, because there's more authorization needed, or maybe you're now not in Portugal and you need to make those transfers. And we've seen people in Portugal had to fly back, or they've given power of attorney to a family member. But again, obviously, I'd only do that if you trust them.
Yes, but it's all hassle, isn't it, that can be avoided potentially. Yeah, okay. One more sort of general question. Then we've got some fantastic questions that have come in. People have woken up from the tryptophan hit from the turkey, it would appear. Thank you very much for all those lovely questions. They're great illustrations of what can be done with Spartan FX. So thank you for all those questions. On a more general note, sticking with the banks and the older institutions, when they say it's free, their service, their currency exchange service is free. There's no such thing as free, is there? That you pay for it somehow.
Yes, I mean it's too good to be true, perhaps. I mean there might be the odd thing that's free. My colleague went to Ascot Racecourse and he paid £1 for his ticket, which I was very surprised about. So it's not impossible, but generally we hear clients that will say, "Oh, my bank said they'll do it for free."
Yeah.
I have set up a Portuguese bank account with Millennium because I come across for my trips. I did it in the UK. It was very straightforward, I would say, with the help of Gilda and EI Migrate. Their team were fantastic.
Yep.
But I went in and she gave me the details for my bank account. And she said, these are your details, but I'll give you this detail for this bank account. If you transfer your money there, then there'll be no fees.
Yes.
I said, "Oh, I'll stop you there."
Of course.
And obviously explain what I did. But again, it's not free. Yes, there might not be a transfer fee, which is great, but I mean, really, you're only going to save probably a maximum of maybe at the most 45 euros or dollars or pounds perhaps, but even then it might only be 20. Yes, you may save that, but it's actually the exchange rate. That's the bit where
it's priced into the deal, isn't it? That's how they're making their money.
That's how they make their money, and that's actually the cost. Even
Yeah.
if the wording of it is different, it isn't free. It's what they're making on that transfer. And we've seen, I've seen Bank of America charge 5% on a customer's transaction. I've seen NatWest in the UK 6%, and that client was doing about 2.6 million euros, and they were charged 6%.
Yikes.
So it does happen. Some are more competitive than others, so it's not a sweeping statement, but generally they are more expensive, and that's the bit that isn't free, and that's the bit that really
worth double checking.
You money.
Yep, it's worth shopping around, isn't it? But double check what the T's and C's.
The other thing as well which was interesting, was that she was telling me the rate of the day for the day before. And again, I was like, well, it's irrelevant because it does change. But also they which some do, they fix what the rate is in the morning. They'll fix that for the whole day. So it isn't quite really how it works. And also, even if I use my bank, they'll never be able to tell me the exact rate until the transfer goes through.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
So if I had to pay a specific amount of euro, it's fine if it was going into my account because it's not a problem. But if I was paying someone specifically, then either they're going to get slightly more euros or they're going to get a little bit less.
Yes.
Now, obviously, if they're getting more, I'd like that back. Otherwise, that's slightly less.
They might be upset if they're getting less, of course.
Yeah, exactly. Depending on obviously the purpose of why you're paying them, you'll have to pay them some more money.
Yes.
Also, as well, you then have to do it last minute because you can only, with your bank, convert and transfer into euros when you've got a destination, when you've got a beneficiary, when you've got, whether it be your own account, whether you're paying, as I said, a lawyer, or you're paying any third party. When you've got bank account details and IBAN to send it to, great. But if you don't have that yet, then you can't actually convert the euros with your bank because they've got nowhere else to put it because you've not got a euro account with them. But what I'm saying about being able to maybe take advantage of the rate or have a little bit of a think about buying euros in advance, if that is beneficial to you, we can do that because we can hold the euros on account free of charge for you.
Okay, quick acronym check there. The IBAN, a bit of jargon busting. What is the IBAN for those who don't know?
So that is your account number, basically.
European account numbers.
European account number.
IBAN.
Unique. Well, if you get your account for your own account, but obviously be unique to you, and that's what they use in Europe that you will need. And that's the other thing as well, is that we generally find that the banks in America, all banks are different. they send payments in different ways. They have different charges, and that's state by state, not just by specific bank. But a lot of the branches, they've never seen an IBAN before. So they don't actually know what to do with it, I think, ultimately, or, how they need to send the payment. Things like that can get a little bit more complicated. Definitely.
And you're there to help with that. Okay, these are great questions. Thank you, Gail, for your first question that we looked at earlier on. Angela, I would like to pay my rent from my US account. Then what's the best way of doing that? Should I transfer to Wise and out again? Is that necessary, that extra step?
Not necessarily. I mean, if you're going to transfer, I mean, the key thing is that with a provider like ourselves or Wise, we're converting the money. So it doesn't negate the need for your US bank account necessarily, or your Portuguese account, or whoever you're paying. It is the function of converting one currency to another at a better rate of exchange, or perhaps giving you a little bit of guidance on that. One thing you can do, if it is something that's regular, there is an element of where you can fix the rate for really up to 2 years on that. So even if you just did it for 12 months or 6 months even, what you can do is then every month how much that's gonna cost you.
So the mechanism is that's fine. Angela can pay rent in euros from a US account. I'm guessing that's what she's asking, paying rent over here in Portugal. You can help with that. And you could set a particular rate for doing so, which could be useful for budgeting in that first year, for example, and fix the costs.
Yes.
Great. Well, that's good to know. Okay, Angela, I hope that answers your question. Let me know if that's what you were asking, if you need any more from us on that, or from Sarah. Paula, I plan on going to Portugal in February on a scouting trip, and I plan on opening a bank account while I'm there. How much would you recommend I transfer into that new bank account? How much they want? You only have to put about 10 euros in, don't you, to open up, as I recall, a Portuguese bank account. They're not asking for a massive amount of money.
No, they've not asked me for anything yet.
Yeah.
But I think there is a fee on the account of about 15 euros. So I will transfer some money into the account just to make sure that I've got money there for that. I've seen clients put, I don't know, 250 euros in. It's entirely up to you, really. I'd say it depends what you're doing. You might want to think about, obviously, when you're there, you're on a scouting trip, you want money in maybe to spend, because that is the cheaper way of doing that, is then you convert your euros, put euros in your new Portuguese bank account, and then you've got your debit card.
Yep, there you
and
go.
Then you can use that to travel about.
Good point.
And also, which I didn't realize, is that if I went to Spain with my debit card, Portuguese debit card, then it wouldn't cost me, wouldn't charge me either.
Very good. Okay, yeah. If your scouting trip includes going across the border, Paul, even in the Algarve, you catch ferry across, and you can withdraw from Spanish machines or use Spanish multibanco equivalent. And yeah, it was a good point, Sarah. You can keep some money in there to cover the costs, which might be anything between around €8 and €15 a month, typically on a Portuguese bank account. So don't go overdrawn, because they'll be charging you for that as well. So an amount at least to cover the charges.
Yes.
But Paula, they're not looking for a massive amount to be in there. It's not part of the T's and C's, unless it is part of the T's and C's and you're getting a particular premium account that's requiring a certain amount every month.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that particular.
The other thing as well is how much you put in. It also depends on what money you've got available and what it is that you're doing. So we've had clients that I've actually spoke to when I was in Portugal recently, who they moved some money in May, and they've moved some money, I think it was before I went out. So what was that? Maybe just before October. They were taking advantage of the exchange rate. So they moved a chunk of money that they had, and then when they saw the rates improve again, they had some money in investments in the US. They took them out to take advantage of the rate.
Okay.
So again, it depends on your situation. If you're very serious about moving, if you're applying for your visa, this sort of thing, then it may be that's the other consideration. It isn't just a case of what's the minimum I need in that account. Yep, that's fine for my trip, for topping up the account. But actually, what's my full situation? What money am I going to need in the future, and what potentially are those timeframes? And that's really what we're sort of looking at. And as far as it isn't necessarily then a bad time for you then to be thinking, right, well, I'll do 10,000, or I'm
Yes.
doing 20,000, or I'm thinking about buying a property in the next 6 months. It's things like that.
Yeah. Okay. That's for Paula then, who's very nervous about the US elections. You're saying there, Paula. If we can help you any further, let me know. Diana says, Carl, it's a bit early here for the tryptophan to have kicked in. Yes, of course, with the time difference. My guess, it might be the mimosas. So people starting the day with a Bucks Fizz over there, equivalent. Happy Thanksgiving. Anyone who's tucking into a mimosa while listening to the webinar tonight. Thank you very much, Paula. To you, Debbie, now. I'm in the process of opening a bank account. It's a Millennium account. Not sure how Spartan FX works. Do I send money directly from my US bank to Millennium or use you as a middleman? Basically, that's what you just answered, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the other thing that I thought when I got the account open, is to sort of, it was good to sort of feel the journey of someone like yourself that's looking to move and opening an account, and what obviously information that you're then being told. So as I said, one of them was, she did say you transfer money to this other account and it will be the transfers will be free. Yes, that's maybe true, but the exchange rate will not be cheap.
Yeah.
So that's something to bear in mind. And the other thing as well is, yes, we talk around about we are a good solution if you don't have an account set up, or if you don't have a beneficiary to transfer to. Some clients have not got a Portuguese bank account, but they need to make certain payments to certain people, and we can still do that. Once you actually have your Millennium or any Portuguese bank account open, doesn't mean that we're then redundant, because the benefits of the service is still exactly the same, getting you a better exchange rate, and really navigating the process of transferring your money from one country to another. And it's that process around the documentation you might need, making sure that beneficiary bank, even if it is your own personal bank account in Portugal, don't hold up the payments. It's all that sort of thing. We've got extra tracking on the payments so that we can tell you exactly where the money is as well. So it's all around that, making that whole process easier for you. As I said, the problems we've seen with customers is more around delays, payments being held up, compliance documents needed, and they've struggled to, for example, with an online provider, they struggle to provide the compliance documents, and the online provider closed their account.
Yikes. Okay. Yeah.
There's more hassle there sometimes.
Yeah. So for you then, Debbie, yes, you are. It's like a middleman. I mean, it's the currency exchange process that you're using Spartan for. And as Sarah said there, once you've opened your account, it doesn't mean that Spartan are redundant. You can continue to use them to change your in this case, dollars into euros, I'm guessing, and to keep doing that. And it's the same for Angela, who asked about the rent, until you don't have to wait. This is an important point, isn't it? You don't have to wait until you've opened a Portuguese bank account to start using Spartan FX. You can open a Spartan FX account straight away, start exchanging, and Spartan will hold it in a euro account for you, as I recall, Sarah, and then it can be moved to the whatever
and it can still be used in conjunction, because even if you've got the account open in Portugal, and say, for example, you suddenly, I don't know, you went to buy a car and you had to pay directly to the seller. Even if you've got a Portuguese bank account, there's still no reason why we can't just transfer the euros from the account you have with us to the seller.
Very good to know.
We've had it where it was in the seller's account within 15 minutes. Whereas if you then have to we transfer it into your Portuguese account, and then from your Portuguese account, you then have to transfer it to the seller, which there's no need for that extra step, which makes it quicker. And we've had clients even that are in the US that, for example, are still preferring to use us because they're not very good with their online banking, their Portuguese online banking. So
of course, because it's in Portuguese for one thing, unless you translate it, and sometimes that's a bit clunky. That's good. So you can help them with that as well and move the euros here. So in that instance, somebody selling a car, you get their IBAN number and transfer the euros from your Spartan account into their IBAN.
Yeah.
Perfect. Good to know. Okay. I think that helps Debbie and Paula there. Apparently, Gail is telling us that the next official date for the election in Canada is on or before October the 20th, 2025. Thank you for that. Diana says, thank you, Sarah. You've touched on my question. What strategy do you recommend for someone in the US who wants to have a euro-denominated account with a bank card for use when in EU countries over 3 to 6 months per year? That would be Millennium or similar, wouldn't it, over here? Euro-denominated account?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, we traditionally we often deal with a lot of clients that I've seen in the past where they've managed to open a multi-currency account. So say, for example, with their local bank, for example, here in the UK, maybe it's HSBC, they've got a sterling account and they've opened a euro or US dollar account. So like in the US or in Canada, in some banks, they may give you the option to open a euro account, for example.
Okay, right.
Not a problem. But again, just because they have the function of you opening an account and you think it's with the same bank, therefore the ease of the transfer between the two accounts might be there. But again, it isn't just about that. It is about what's the exchange rate, what are they charging you on that front, and what guidance are you getting about moving that money.
Yep. So check that. I've had a direct message here. Thank you. And when we stop recording, if you prefer to answer or ask a question and have it answered more privately and not in the recorded part, then just wait up on that. Well, I'll ask a few more questions here. And thanks, Astrid, for the Dream Team link. That's in the chat as well now for the session at 9 o'clock. With the full panel of Dream Team experts helping you move to Portugal. This person who sent me a direct message, I see Spartan FX, the website states it trades in 38 currencies. Is it possible to see that list? Probably the best way to do that, that's going to be a long list to read out, is to get in touch, right, with you direct. You can see the email address, expats, Portugal at spartanfx.co.uk on the screen. There is what I would suggest to the person who asked
I would get in touch, because there's a lot, again, more complexities around moving money around the world. And as far as that, in some countries, we might not be able to do the local currency, but we can still do. So for example, I had a client who had money in Peru. Now we can't do the local currency, but we can trade euros, US dollars, and the client actually had US dollars in Peru. So again, there's different levels of certain currencies. Some are deemed what they call high risk. Again, it's all around money laundering. And there's some countries that are then deemed high risk as well, and maybe not the currency. So there's lots of factors around there, and there's lots of ways that maybe we can deal with the country, but maybe not the local currency. But again, what currency you're holding, and it's really understanding your situation. To be honest,
so that person, it would be worth having a conversation if you're dealing in multiple currencies there. We have LaRonda saying, I made my first transfer to my Spartan FX account to pay a bill. Ben was awesome. I feel like almost an expert at international transfers. Who knew? Well done, LaRonda. Congratulations on that. Gail, having just set up a Spartan FX account, can you tell me the steps in the process of making smaller euro payments to third parties in Portugal, which is, of course, what you mentioned, the pool person you've mentioned in the past, haven't you? The person who cleans the pool.
Anyone that's got an IBAN, I mean, what have we paid that's been a bit different? Well, yeah, you can pay the pool man, although I'm probably sure they probably want that in cash.
We don't encourage that.
We've paid well, I suppose interior designers, art galleries, you pay for your car.
And what's the mechanism, Sarah? Is it an online interface? Is that how it's done? Or
we have an online system,
yeah.
But I would say the majority of our clients speak to us or send us an email or contact us in some way, purely because they prefer. I think they like speaking to us anyway. Any excuse.
It's really nice. It's really good old school stuff, isn't it? Being able to speak to somebody. It's wonderful. Yeah. And unusual in this day and age. And it's great because it's a lot of people like that who work here with Expats Portugal. You can speak to Nunu like that. You can speak to EI. You can speak to real people and not the robots.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you an example. So I used Gilda and her team to help me because I needed to get a NIF in order to get the bank account so that I could have that account for when I come for trips. Yeah. So I needed to pay a small amount for Gilda's fee, as a small amount. And although obviously I know what I'm doing, work in this industry, I work for Spartan FX, I ring up Steve. Steve, can you move this money for me?
Just to test it as a user experience.
And it was just, I could have logged into my own account and done it myself, but I just rang Steve up. I told him how many euros that I needed. He gave me the price. I said, yep, let's do that.
Right,
then I got the email. I transferred my sterling to Spartan FX, to my Spartan FX account. I'd already sent Steve Gilda's details, and as soon as the money came in, he just sent it out. I didn't even have to do anything. I just said, these are the details. And he said, "Are you sure? As long as when the money comes in, it'll go out." I was like, "Yep, fine." Off it went.
That's my next question. Marks out of 10 for Steve then, your testimonial.
Oh, I would say marks out. I'd say 10 out of 10 for Steve. He was very good.
That could have been awkward and embarrassing. Okay. Which US banks does Spartan prefer to work with in terms of maximizing value to clients? That's a good question, isn't it? So what are your preferences with US banks? Or does it vary from state to state and branch to
As
branch?
I said, it does actually vary state to state, I would say, to be honest. What is really fascinating is that the banking system does seem a little bit more archaic and old school than you would think. And,
really?
There's certain banks where, the charges vary state to state, even if it's the same bank. And there are some better than others. Again, do get in touch and we can kind of run through the options. But you see, for example, obviously a lot of people have like brokerage accounts. Some are better than others. Some won't make international transfers. You have to transfer it to your checking account. We've seen Wells Fargo isn't the greatest. We've seen Charles Schwab is better. As I said, if you're using them and not us, I've seen Bank of America charge 5%. Having said that, if you're using us, obviously we can work with really most of the banks. There's only the odd few that won't make international transfers, so you'd have issues anyway. But again, we like to speak to you to find out what banks you bank with, because some people do bank with a couple of banks, so we can give an idea of which is better from maybe a transfer cost perspective, or make it quicker to make those transfers out of the country. Or it may be a case of where we've seen a client maybe who the banks that they bank with aren't great for that, and we've helped them get a Charles Schwab account open. You've got to hold it in there for 10 days before you can move the money out, but it's been a bit easier, quicker to move the US dollars from Charles Schwab to us and then on to the third party. So again, it's all about some of this stuff. It's not difficult. We can help you through the process, but some things do take a little bit of time.
A learning curve, isn't it? Of course.
If you're doing it last minute, there's very little time to try and get solutions put in place for any issues that you might come across.
Thanks for that. Let's stay with accounts. Is it necessary, asked Paula, to keep my US bank account active if I don't plan on using it? My plan is just to use a Portuguese bank account exclusively, since I won't have any recurring bills happening in the US. I've heard many different recommendations. In talking to other people, do they tend to keep a US account open for some reason?
Some people do tend to keep an account, but again, it's just situation. So where I've seen people keep accounts, whether it be in America, Canada, the UK, is because they maybe still have family that they come across to see. They might have pensions being transferred into that account, perhaps. So it depends on your situation.
Interesting, isn't it? Because if it doesn't cost anything, it might be worth keeping open, because it could be an upheaval if you needed to open one. I guess it's easier to keep an old one open than reopen a new one, isn't it? Especially if you're not in the country anymore. So
yeah, it'd be difficult for you to. I mean, that was one of the things that we saw more recently. Well, in the last sort of few years with UK customers, is that if you've then haven't got a UK address, you'll struggle maybe to get an account open. Having said that, some of the banks were cracking down a little bit and were actually closing people's accounts that were no longer living there and were living overseas. So, there's different things. But again, I'd say it depends on your situation.
Well, Paula's happy with that. Paula's happy with that, which is great. Thank you for that feedback, Paula. A couple of quickies then before we go to the end of the recording, where people can ask more personal questions if they wish. Devon's asking, can we set a trigger with Spartan FX to automatically initiate a transfer?
Yes, we can do that as well.
That's easy. Okay. And this gets asked, doesn't it, when we talk from time to time from Randa? Nice try, Randa. Does the money collect any interest while it sits with Spartan FX?
No, it doesn't. So the account is very similar to a bank account as far as it's in your name. We can receive money from third parties. We can send money to third parties. We can hold your euros or any currency up to 38 on account free of charge. But that's where it stops. So it doesn't earn any interest. And to be honest, the main reason we hold euros on account is more for convenience of either A, you don't have somewhere to send it to yet, and B, you're trying to take advantage of the exchange rate.
Yeah.
So
All
again,
about the rate, isn't it?
maybe that's something also, again, we have that conversation with customers. Where is your money at the moment?
Yeah.
It's in a high interest rate account. How much interest is it earning? What's the rate movement on that, and the benefit or the gain that you've maybe made on that exchange? What does that look like? How long will you hold this money for? So, for example, if your plan is that you'll need this money in the next, I don't know, 3 months, 6 months, how much interest would you earn being where it is now? And look at it like that.
Yes.
And that kind of would help make that decision. There may be a way that we could, depending on what you're doing, that especially around probably purchases where we let you fix the rate with just a 10% deposit. So that might be something if it is in a high interest earning account. But again, best to just have a discussion around your situation, where your money is, what interest it's earning, and your time frames.
That's great. So Angela, thank you. Perfect. Thank you for clarifying. Sarah from Debbie, that example made perfect sense that you gave. That's wonderful. And thank you, Sarah from Diana. So very helpful. And I will reach out to get your thoughts about how best to set up an account with Spartan. You can see that they are 2023 FIFO Platinum Service Award winners. And I'll just share one testimonial here. Let me see if that will show up on the screen here. Exceptional customer service. It's back to Steve again. I've been working with Steve Flack for the last couple of weeks on a rather large transaction. Never dealt with currency exchange on this level before, and Steve was patient and clear throughout the entire process. It really set my mind at ease. I would highly recommend you work with him. He provides really exceptional customer service. You can ask for people by name, but we tend to see that all the team get testimonials like that. Not to, in no disservice or disrespect to Steve there, but people, Ben, but other people in the team get those sorts of testimonials, don't they?
Yes, I mean, there's Neil, we've got 2 Bens now, and we have Alistair. We have more team members, but they're the ones that have really been dealing with Expat Portugal members. So if you do get someone else that's not called Steve, do not be concerned. They've all dealt with many Expat Portugal members, and you can see on our FIFO reviews, a lot of them are mentioned by name as well, that people have enjoyed their service. But just a quick on that, there are more members of the Spartan FX team, because we actually do have a corporate department. And that's something we're seeing a little bit more that maybe people don't realize that we offer, but also we're seeing it more and more where people are moving and opening businesses in Portugal, and maybe already have a business in America, Canada, UK, Australia, wherever. And we can still help with those transactions. Very similar sort of process, to be fair. But it is a corporate account.
Thanks for mentioning that. Frank says, thanks for a very informative talk. It's a pleasure, Frank, on this Thanksgiving afternoon here, evening for us here in Portugal. And Devon, Team Ben and Neil here. So final words then before we switch the recording off, Sarah?
There's just one thing that I didn't mention that I think is a thing to bear in mind around really security. A couple of things. One, again, obviously, we'd love if you get in touch and speak to the team. But if you don't use us, sort of parting things are, one is that we talked about IBAN numbers. Always check the IBAN number. So that's one of the things we do. We do 2 things. One, we encourage doing a small test if you've not transferred money before to an account, and also ringing the beneficiary and checking those details, which is what we do. Because unfortunately, again, fraud, and especially I'd say in the last since the pandemic, where more and more things have gone online, I think that has become, unfortunately, more common day, where we've seen examples where clients' emails have been intercepted, or maybe the person that's sending it to you, the lawyer, whoever, they've been intercepted. And if they change a digit on that IBAN, and as long as it's a valid IBAN number, your bank, online provider, that money will go, because it's a valid IBAN. Might not be the right one that you need to send it to through fraud or human error, but that money will go because it's a valid IBAN. So it's always worthwhile double checking, unfortunately.
Double checking it, definitely. Yeah, it's a lot of numbers. So yeah, do take your time and double check that. Anything else, Sarah, or should we leave it there?
I think that was it. I know that some people, I mean, you can see it in the reviews, might be a little bit nervous because they've never done this before, especially as I said, if you are transferring slightly larger sums and you've never had to move money. We've obviously talked about the personal service that we offer. Hopefully that helps to reassure people. The other side as well is, as I touched on, obviously there's lots of regulations and around different countries and currencies, but we do have, or certainly be watching out for, in certain countries, for example, the UK, you have to be FCA authorized and regulated. In America, it's with FinCEN and the money transmitter licenses, you need one in every state that someone lives in. And in Australia, it's ASAC, which we have in place to be able to deal with customers. Also, I mentioned that the accounts are in the customer's name, and the way that the accounts are set up, what it means is it provides extra security. All your money's safe. So if anything should happen to us as a company, you'd get all of your money back. It wouldn't be I think it's normally it's about up to about 85 or 100,000 euros or something like that usually. Whereas in this case, you'd get all of your money back, which I think when I'm talking about obviously people holding money on account with us, that might be a concern, but the money is secure.
Good to know. Great point to conclude on. Actually, this is a great point to conclude on. Great talk. Thanks, says Debbie. I have an account with you and just waiting until my Millennium account is opened. I'll need to deposit the amount needed for my D7 appointment with VFS. Excellent stuff. Thank you, Debbie, for that. Thank you, Sarah. And thank you, everybody, for your questions on this Thanksgiving afternoon, evening here. And we'll take some more personal questions now as I turn off the recording. Thanks, Sarah. Great job.